for coming back. Today we're going to be talking about the rest of Michel Henry. And I was saying it wrong last time. I was saying Henry, which is understandable because it looks like Henry, right? But I always forget that, the French are fucking stupid and have to pronounce everything wrong. So it is in fact Henri. And also that's a sign of actually a worldly person who pronounces words wrong, because it means that they only know the words by reading them, right? So really an educated person is going to be more likely to mispronounce things, or at least that's my cope for the day. But either way, not a huge deal. Michel Henry's Barbarism. And so this is the last third of the book, so hopefully this doesn't take too long, but there's some really interesting stuff to discuss. And I also want to bring up a video that was posted as a comment to the last video by the user Anomos. I don't know who you are, or if you're in the Discord, or if that's just another pseudonym, but the video that you posted regarding Michel Henry and his overall philosophy was great, and I would like to bring up some things from that in the context, or barbarism in the context of his larger philosophy, because there's some pretty interesting metaphysics stuff that I don't think I really went into last time, but we could definitely talk about it. So without further ado, I'll just jump right into some of these quotes here. So the first chapter we're talking about is I think it's the ideologies of barbarism. I think that's where we left off. So the first quote I want to talk about, he goes through and talks about energy and culture, and the existence of culture and life in general is predicated on this usage of energy. So there's some energy, you could call it life force, within the human being, and that energy must be directed towards culture. And if it is not, if this energy is not liberated, then it gets directed into I guess you could call it degenerate things. And this is where scientism brings us. You don't have the free liberation of energy, so therefore energy gets directed into these things that are not benefiting culture. And that's why scientism and technology lead to this decline in culture. So a good quote on this, he says, "Imagine a world where there are no longer any churches or temples, where even the most modest and utilitarian edifice is no longer topped by a pediment or flanked or preceded by a colonnade, as in Ephesus. Imagine a world where the organization of work is no longer rooted in organic subjectivity, where work is no longer the actualization of one's powers through the immanent play of their inner disposition, their coming to themselves, and thus the liberation of their energy. Then, instead of this feeling of liberation, a profound malaise comes to affect the existence and numb it. Without being able to exhaust its being by reaching its basis in self-growth and in the intoxication of oneself, each need and motion remains only halfway to them and locked into a suffering that no longer goes beyond itself into enjoyment. There is a malaise in civilization every time that the energy of life remains unemployed." So very interesting here, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, that when you are not directing, even on a personal level, right, if you're not directing energy into something productive, you have this personal depression, right? You kind of you become sad, you get these feelings of worthlessness. Why would this not be true at a societal level? Right, if society is not putting its efforts into, monuments, churches, temples, beautiful art, then it's going to suffer this malaise, as he calls it. And let's just think about, when people talk about trying to cure someone's depression, right? Many of the things that they say are, go outside, learn a skill, exercise, lift weights, all of these things. These things are contributing to, some degree of building up yourself, right? And then the expression of culture, right, is a building up of society and this reinforcement of life as a whole, rather than just your individual life. So I think there's a very interesting one-to-one comparison here between the society and the liberation of its energy, as well as the individual. So yeah, very, very interesting point about how not expressing that energy becomes very detrimental to us. And he has a few other points on this as soon as I get to them. So next he says, the effect, its irreducible mode of phenomenological presentation, takes the form of a growing malaise. It thus seeks to liberate itself, but this time it does so by following pre-traced paths which provide immediate relief. The loss of pain, the afflux of energy that could not be invested in the highest and most difficult tasks, is found intact on the plane where one now seeks to get rid of it. It remains intact, or rather, it is increased by all the difference that separates the more from the less. The share of unemployed energy has only increased, and along with it, so has the malaise. Once again, really good one-to-one comparison between the individual and the society. This energy, as it grows into a malaise, if it does not have a method of liberating itself, it goes to this method of relieving itself through the loss of pain. So what do we mean by that? Well, I would say at an individual level, I would think of things like binge eating, drinking, drugs, all of these numbing effects, right? Numb away the pain. Even things like masturbation. I mean, that's kind of something that people do just out of boredom. They have excess energy and they need to, direct it into some method of feeling good, some way of reducing their pain. And we see that at a societal level, we kind of do the exact same thing. Without this movement towards creation and culture, now you have this movement towards reducing harm, and I think that's what a lot of technology is doing. We want people to be, fatter, lazier, less creative, all of these things, so we can reduce their pain. There's no pain through hunger. There's no pain through having to exercise. There's no pain through just living, because we all we're encouraged to do be alcoholics, all of these different things. And this is when this life force is not being directed into something greater. It naturally is going to be directed into self-destruction, masquerading as a reduction of pain. And I think you could take this even to a further logical conclusion, that things like technology that are attempting to, increase the standard of human life is actually just centered around this loss of pain, and is actually detrimental to the human being, right? Things like automation, things like artificial intelligence, as these things become implemented more and more in their attempt to make our lives easier and supposedly better, it's actually just making us harder and harder to express that energy, that life energy that he's talking about. It's making it even harder to be liberated, and naturally this malaise is not going to go away. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that as technology increases and this standard of life is increasing, we're not really seeing this increase in human happiness. We're not seeing decreases in depression. We're not seeing decreases in suicide. In fact, those things are actually going up. And I think it's due to this malaise, as he calls it, that technology is not fixing at all. And so the next thing he says, The inability of a civilization to give itself tasks that are equal to its means, the means of life, entails the release of its uncontrolled energies, and as always, this sluggishness engenders violence. Now, this is really interesting as well, and so now this malaise that he's talking about, this sort of pain or disaffectedness, it's going to turn violent at some point, and I guess you sort of see this in some ways, and we do have a large amount of senseless violence going on, and I think you can talk about violence as its own concept. Is violence inherently good or bad? Well, that's up for debate, but I think that there's plenty of bad violence going around today's, we'd say senseless violence, petty crime, petty murder, all of these things. And this could be another symbol of this disaffected society, this malaise, this inability to use that energy directed towards anything else. So that unused energy is directed towards senseless violence. So I really like this whole chapter that talks about this life force, as he calls it, and this liberation of the life force is what leads to the growth of culture, and the suppression of this life force is what is the decline of culture. And then he goes on, I believe this is in the next chapter. The next quote, he says, one can see that the media world results from such a will by the fact that it no longer does anything. It is content just to look. It does not look in the way that the spectator looks at the work of art. Instead, it only looks in the following way. It does nothing. It does not deploy any of the inner powers of life, not even that of looking. There is thus a way of looking and without seeing. It implies as its correlate a media image that is not just easy, but nil. This nullity finds its expression in the self-disappearance of this image at each instant. So to translate that, he's talking about sort of this decline in media that has arisen. And once again, there's another topic that is similar to what was discussed in Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, and how there's this clear and obvious degeneration as you go from spoken word to print to television. And here, when he's talking about the media world, right, he's obviously talking about television. And this is an interesting way of putting it. You look without seeing, or without even looking. So there's this idea of actively looking at something. Like if you go to the art museum and you look at a painting, right, there's this active element to it. You're looking for certain things, you're taking it in, you're appreciating it. Whereas when you look at the television, sometimes it's unconscious. You don't even register what you're looking at. When you're at the doctor's office and there's a small TV playing in the waiting room, do you even know what's on the TV? Your eyes are just drawn to it because it's there. And this is the kind of way that media as a whole is becoming. It is not consumed in any kind of intelligent way. And I think this goes a little bit deeper than just like a trite point, like television is just becoming more of a spectacle. But it's becoming totally mind numbing. There is no activity to it. You are a totally passive viewer. You're not participating in the media at all. With something like a book, you have to actively engage with the words on the paper, or else you're not getting anything. Whereas TV, you just sort of absorb by osmosis, and that has its own slew of problems with it. So he very much complains about this, TVification of the world. And there's a point where he talks about how this bleeds into education. And I think we'll get there at some point with another quote. But pretty interesting take there that is echoed by definitely a few other people. And so in the next chapter, he has a quote that says, with this attempt to produce an exhaustive explication of subjectivity on the basis of biology, scientific psychology reveals its most ultimate materialist presupposition. It self-destructs as an autonomous discipline in order to give voice to a science of nature. The alienation of the human being is thus pushed to its extreme limit. Everything that is human is explained through what is in no way human. Scientific and materialist psychology thus appears as the truth of the Galilean project applied to the human being, and it consists of the elimination of its own essence. So really good stuff here, and this is a sort of an extension of his overall philosophy. So I guess now would be a good time to kind of get into this. Henri is a radical subjectivist, somewhere along the lines of René Descartes. So I wouldn't say that he's Cartesian. That video that I was talking about, it essentially explained his opinion as he believed that Descartes was misunderstood. So he thinks that he knows Descartes better than most people. So to summarize my understanding of Henri's metaphysical viewpoint, so he's radical subjectivist, which, what does that mean? Well, it means he believes, similar to Descartes, that the foundation of all knowledge is understanding of yourself. So you can't prove that anything exists besides your own subjective experience. So that was Descartes' cogito, I think, therefore I am. He can prove his own existence by the fact that he can view life through his own eyes, subjectively. And Henri agrees that this is our only real starting point. And he sort of takes this very far. So a lot of his philosophy in this book is based on this subjectivity, which is why he has such an issue with science, like we are seeing right here. Science is at least claiming in all ways to be not subjective. It claims that it has the objective reality. But all of these scientists who are doing science are doing it through their subjective lens. So how is it there can possibly be this objective scientific reality when the only thing we understand is our own subjective realities? So it's a contradiction here. And he says they're taking this contradiction to a very extreme when you try to say that the human being is this fully material thing. And you can explain a human with these laws of science that are inherently not subjective. They don't take into account this subjectivity. And this is a very popular argument you see with religious people. You have science that can't really explain things like consciousness. It can't explain things like why are humans all drawn towards religion, right? Why is there this clawing for something greater? Why is it that what is the actual categorical difference that separates us from animals? Why are we capable of art and Coco the gorilla isn't, if in certain ways our IQs are similar? So very interesting stuff there. And essentially this materialistic way of thinking, right, it is in denial of the subjective nature of humans. We only experience ourselves subjectively, so to try and reduce that to an objective material phenomenon really makes no sense. And I think it's increasingly nonsensical as we deal with these problems, like especially, what is consciousness? Why can't we recreate consciousness in a robot or any of these things? And we're becoming closer and closer to being forced to admit that there is this subjective aspect of a human that cannot be explained scientifically. But plenty of people are very, very resistant to that notion and think that everything is going to be this perfectly materialist, objective explanation. So that was him, once again going off on this scientistic worldview. So next, we have a very, very large section here, and he's talking about some issues with the university, and this is going a combination of his. He had a previous rant dedicated to the decline of the university, and I'll talk about that in a second. But he's linking this to his thoughts on this televisionification of the country. So he says, repetition and contemporaneity is the essence of all authentic teaching, but it must give way to the science of communication, which, under the guise of rethinking specific questions, ensures the general promotion of media communication. True teaching is television, and with the media communication, they also promote media existence. Surveys, opinion polls, what is talked about, stereotypes, general vulgarity, cartoons, the new civilization of the image, all of this points back to banality and everyday prosaicism, and is happily put on display. That is what professors subjugated to the news and social dogma are charged to teach. They have been changed into television viewers, who have become just as receptive and futile as them. That's only halfway there, so bear with me. The concrete truth of this entire movement can be summed up as follows. Traditionally, intellectual and spiritual power was assumed by those who fulfilled the great movement of self-growth of life, and who were dedicated to the task of transmitting it to others through a possible repetition. But this power has been taken away from the clerics and intellectuals by new masters who blindly serve the world of technology and the media, by the journalists and politicians. And who else? So there's a lot of different thoughts here. So we start with the way that education has been sort of televisionified as well. So we used to, spend most of the time in university reading, writing these great works of literature and philosophy, and that was what the university was dedicated to. And he talks about this. It used to be the university was a place of letters. They didn't have schools of science. You had schools of language and writing and all of these things. And now that it has become an institution of science, there's been a few changes to this humanities aspect as well. It's becoming increasingly dumbed down. It's now instead of talking about these great works, they're focusing on political, current events, things like this, the daily happenings and all of these things, and it always has to be whatever the hot button issue of the day is. And it's going to be taught through this medium of, television, live interviews, political cartoons, and all of these things that are very modern. You're not reading any, great modern classics of literature. Cassius says, I paid thousands of dollars a semester for a few PowerPoint presentations. Yep, not exactly how it used to be, huh? So then the second point going into this is, how exactly did this happen? So we originally had, he says, these intellectuals and clerics, and now it's been degenerated into journalists and politicians. And this is sort of a more traditionalist type point that Henri is making here, and you can look at sort of how this corresponds to many of the declines that people like Evola, Guénon, etc., kind of talk about as society declines from this aristocratic philosopher, cleric class to the warrior class, these higher classes, and then it is sort of declining to the merchant class and then the slave class. And I would say that, the journalists and politicians these days are definitely this merchant type class. That sounds bad, but you know what I'm talking about. It's this degenerated class that isn't focused on any higher type of philosophy, but instead political gain and monetary gain, and that's what it's all settled on. There is no greater knowledge being developed at the university anymore, and this is what he talks about. And I think this is one aspect of things. I mean, you can look at this through many different lenses, such as cultural Marxism and subversion to that degree of education as a whole, and then also just the way that society has changed and more people are going into university, and these are all factors. But I think that what Henri brings up here is one of many different factors that have led to the decline of the university, but no less important. All right, so where was I? I think I had one or two more quotes I wanted to bring up. Here we go. So in the very final chapter, his conclusion, he says, "The media of the technological age have very different characteristics. Their content is the insignificant, the news. Tomorrow it will no longer have the least interest. There is even good reason to believe that there is no interest at the time of the event. The medium is the televised image. Instead of the permanent to which one must return in order to grow on one's own, it continually falls into a nothingness from which we'll never be able to leave. The media world thus does not offer a self-realization of life. It offers escape." So really good point here. It kind of extends on what he meant by this, what exactly is so degenerated about television. And part of it is its transience. It is not permanent. It is not something that can stand and be appreciated. It's something that is forgotten the very next day. There's just too many episodes of Fox News and CNN for you to watch all of them and keep track of all of them, and it's just this totally fleeting thing that is 100% not art, yet it is absorbing 90% of our attention and effort as far as what we're thinking about and caring about. So it is a very far cry from these permanent forms of media, things like a book or even a painting. And in the same way, this last quote, "The media world thus does not offer a self-realization of life. It offers escape." So where other forms of media actually are an aspect of culture and lead to this self-realization, right? You might even call it, self-actualization, a greater understanding of the self through art and culture. Only the opposite is happening through modern media. You are becoming disconnected. You are escaping from the real world into this media world where things are not nearly so important and things are not nearly so concrete and real. So that's the danger of the modern media here. So that was his final concluding chapter. So not a whole lot new here that was not at least hinted at in the first part of the book. But I did want to go more into this this subjective aspect and also his overall philosophy. So I didn't know this when I picked up the book, but Henri later in his life became a devout Christian, and this arose after he picked up the gospel and realized that it was sort of the solution to his philosophy. So he had this, we called it the radical subjectivity, that he believed that there was nothing sure besides understanding of your own experience. You only see the world through your own eyes. You only experience it as a self. You cannot disconnect from that. So where is the objective? Where is the real? What can we prove to be real? Well, you have this self and this life, and because of that, we can say that life definitely does exist, but life has to have some progenitor, and Henri found the solution to this in the Gospel of John, I believe, where Christ says, "I am the way, the truth, the life." He says, yes, this resonated with him, and he wrote a book that was "I Am the Truth," regarding this revelation of his philosophy. But essentially, the solution to this is this life that we understand must exist. It is given to us from God, from Jesus Christ. This is the source of our life, and so our subjective existence is derived from this one being who is the objective truth. I am the truth. And so we derive our life from him who is the truth, and that is our understanding of what is objective. All else is subjective. And I think I kind of mostly agree with this. I think this is a very sensible way of building a metaphysics, a wider philosophy of life, because there's so much we can't know for certain due to our own subjectivity. We can't dissociate from ourselves, but you can, if you believe in God, if you believe in something, you can attempt to know God. And if we take for granted life and understand that because it exists, and there is a creator, that is a good jumping off point for finding something objective in this world, finding some sort of truth that we can believe in and fight for, and all of these things. So I liked that revelation about Henri, and I think read in that lens, this book has a bit more meaning as far as his radical subjective type of views. And all in all, I think as far as a critique of scientism, it's good. Once again, I don't know how much truly groundbreaking stuff is in here. I mean, it's a lot of things that, like I said, other traditionalists, Ganon, even Postman, regarding things like media, talked about. But it's a very solid work here, and I would definitely love to read more of Henri's works, especially the Christian ones, because I want to see more about how he fleshes out that philosophy. Because I don't know, he seems like a very unknown philosopher. I never heard of him before somebody suggested this book to me, but he takes all of his influence from the greats, Descartes, and he has some influence of I believe Husserl, and other French philosophers. So he's well read and pretty much well respected. So if this guy makes a good argument for a strong philosophy rooted Christianity, I think that could be a very powerful force for a lot of people. Yeah, so I don't know how much more I have to add. I'll go through and read any comments you want to post, and if anybody wants to hop into the voice chat, I will be ready for that as well. But Patton was right 45 said, "A man with an experience of God is never at the mercy of a man with an argument." Quote by Leonard Ravenhill. That's a very good quote. And once again, I think this is important with in the context of Henri, right? So if God, if we can derive God as our singular objective truth, then nothing else really matters. Then anything else that appears to be objective to us, we can sort of cast aside for what we understand to be the one real truth, the actual truth of the universe. So exactly, any argument is going to fall flat against that person. Connection isn't good enough to call tonight. That's totally fine, Cassius. I know you'll be back one of these other weeks. But yeah, I guess that's gonna be it for tonight then. I appreciate all of you guys for hanging out, and we have not decided on our next book yet, but if you're in the Discord, we're gonna have a poll and figure that out in the next few days. So thanks for checking it out, and I hope you have a good night.